Elon Musk sat quietly in his office, a rare moment of stillness amidst the whirlwind of innovation and ambition that defined his life. The idea had come to him during a conversation with a colleague about human behavior. What would happen if people didn't recognize him? How would they treat someone who seemed to have nothing? The thought lingered, turning into an irresistible challenge. Weeks later, on an overcast Thursday afternoon, he finalized the details. His disguise was simple yet effective: second-hand clothing from a local thrift shop, scuffed sneakers that barely held together, and a scruffy, unkempt wig. A small makeup team completed the look, adding just enough wear to his face to erase the familiar features that graced magazine covers and news feeds. The transformation was stunning. Elon Musk, the billionaire innovator, now looked like any man who had fallen on hard times. He chose his destination carefully: the Copper Elm, an upscale restaurant in Santa Fe, New Mexico, known for its exclusivity and elegant clientele. It was the perfect testing ground. This wasn't about shaming anyone but understanding human nature. Would people look beyond the surface, or would they let appearances dictate their actions? Before leaving, he took a final glance in the mirror. The reflection staring back at him was unfamiliar, almost haunting. For the first time in years, he felt invisible, stripped of the identity that had defined him. With a deep breath, he stepped out the door, his heart beating faster than he expected. The ride to the restaurant was uneventful, the city bustling with life as usual. But for Elon, every moment felt charged with anticipation. As he approached the grand double doors of the Copper Elm, he hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then, pushing them open, he stepped inside, his experiment officially underway. The Copper Elm exuded sophistication. The chandeliers cast a warm glow over meticulously arranged tables, and the murmur of conversation mixed with the occasional clinking of glasses. Elon's entrance caused a subtle ripple. Patrons glanced up briefly before resuming their meals, but the staff lingered, their eyes darting toward him. He stepped cautiously onto the polished hardwood floor, aware of every scuff his worn-out shoes made. A hostess, impeccably dressed in black, approached him hesitantly, her professional smile wavering as she took in his appearance. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice polite but strained. "Yes," Elon replied, his tone steady but soft. "I'd like a table for one." The hostess glanced toward the bar where a manager stood watching the interaction closely. Her smile faltered further. "We're fully booked tonight," she said quickly, her eyes flicking to a row of empty tables. Elon caught the glance but said nothing. Instead, he waited, letting the silence grow uncomfortable. From across the room, a young server named Sophia noticed the exchange. She had only been working at the Copper Elm for a few months, saving up for culinary school. Something about the man's demeanor struck her, not pity, but curiosity. She could tell he wasn't just another wanderer looking for shelter. "I can seat him," Sophia called out, stepping forward before the hostess could dismiss him entirely. The room went quiet for a moment. All eyes were on her, including the managers, who frowned but said nothing. Elon offered Sophia a faint smile as she led him to a small table near the kitchen doors. It wasn't the prime spot, but it was a seat, and he was grateful. "Thank you," he said, his voice sincere. Sophia nodded, placing a menu in front of him. "Take your time," she said warmly, ignoring the whispers that started up around her. Elon observed the room carefully as he flipped through the menu. The glances from other diners ranged from curious to disdainful. He overheard snippets of conversation, speculation about who he was and why he was there. The staff, too, seemed uneasy. One server whispered loudly to another, "What's he even doing here?" Another added, "This is going to scare off the regulars." Elon noted their reactions silently, each one adding to the picture he was piecing together. As Sophia returned to take his order, Elon decided on something simple: soup and bread. "That's all?" she asked, her tone kind but surprised. "That's all," Elon replied. Sophia didn't question him further. She disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Elon alone with his thoughts and the judgmental stares of the room. He could feel the weight of their gazes, but it didn't faze him. If anything, it confirmed why he was there. People often talked about kindness and empathy, but how often did they practice it when it truly mattered? As Elon waited for his meal, the tension in the room grew palpable. Diners whispered behind napkins, some glancing at him with barely concealed disdain. A man at a nearby table leaned toward his companion, muttering, "You think he wandered in here by mistake? Probably looking for a free meal," the other replied dismissively. Sophia returned with the soup and bread, setting it down gently. "Enjoy," she said, offering him a small but genuine smile. "I will," Elon said, meeting her gaze. "Thank you." For the next several minutes, he ate in silence, acutely aware of every movement around him. When he finished, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notepad, jotting something down before placing a folded bill beneath his plate. As he stood and made his way toward the exit, Sophia hurried over to clear the table. She picked up the note first, her eyes widening as she read it. "Thank you for seeing me as a person, not a circumstance. Keep that kindness. It will take you far." Beneath it was a crisp $1,000 bill. Sophia's breath caught. She turned toward the door, but Elon was already gone, blending into the crowd outside. The manager and hostess rushed over, peering at the note in disbelief. Around the restaurant, murmurs grew louder, realization dawning on every face. "Who was he?" someone asked. Sophia, still holding the note, smiled faintly. "Just someone who wanted to see the truth." And with that, Elon Musk's experiment had come to a close, not with anger, not with accusations, but with a simple, undeniable truth about human nature. The whispers in the restaurant grew louder as Sophia hesitated before stepping forward. The shock was evident on her face, her hands gripping the tray she had been holding just moments before. Elon Musk, the billionaire, the innovator, the man behind some of the world's most groundbreaking technologies, had just revealed himself from beneath a disguise that had fooled everyone in the room. Elon turned to face the crowd once more, his expression unreadable. The patrons who had dismissed him, the staff who had scorned him, now stared in wide-eyed disbelief. The very same people who had judged him based on his appearance were now scrambling to process the reality unfolding before them. "I didn't come here tonight for special treatment," Elon continued, his voice carrying through the stunned silence. "I came to see how people treat others when they believe there's nothing to gain from them. And what I found was disappointing." A few diners looked away, suddenly fascinated with their silverware. Others whispered among themselves, their previous arrogance now replaced with discomfort. The manager, who had been so eager to remove him moments earlier, stood stiffly, his face pale. "But," Elon said, turning his attention back to Sophia, "not everyone failed this test." Sophia swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. I was just doing my job," she stammered, still grappling with the weight of the moment. Elon shook his head. "No, you were doing more than that. You were kind when others were cruel. You saw a person when others saw a problem." A ripple of murmurs moved through the restaurant. Some guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, realizing how poorly they had behaved. Elon reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek, black business card. "I admire people who act with integrity, especially when no one is watching," he said, extending the card to Sophia. "If you ever want to work for a company that values character as much as skill, call this number." Sophia hesitated before accepting the card, her fingers brushing against the embossed letters. Her eyes flickered with uncertainty, then gratitude. The manager, who had remained silent for too long, suddenly found his voice. "Mr. Musk, I sincerely apologize for any misunderstanding. We, of course, would have treated you differently had we known." Elon cut him off with a look. "That's exactly the problem," he said. "You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with decency." The words struck like a hammer, leaving no room for rebuttal. The weight of the truth settled over the room, heavy and undeniable. After a long moment, Elon turned back to Sophia, offering her a genuine smile. "Thank you for reminding me that kindness still exists," he said. Sophia's lips parted, but before she could respond, the room broke into hesitant applause. It started with a few claps, then slowly grew into something more substantial. Some were clapping out of admiration, others out of sheer guilt, but all understood the lesson that had just unfolded before them. Elon nodded once more at Sophia, then picked up his coat from the chair. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the exit, leaving the restaurant buzzing with energy, uncertainty, and a much-needed moment of reflection. As he stepped outside, the crisp night air filled his lungs, feeling somehow fresher than before. His experiment had served its purpose. He had seen the truth firsthand. Too often, people judged worth based on appearances, ignoring the depth of those they overlooked. But he had also found hope in the form of one young woman who had chosen kindness over judgment. As he walked down the sidewalk, his phone buzzed. A message from his assistant flashed on the screen. The disguise worked. Everyone's talking about it. What's next? Elon glanced back at the Copper Elm, watching through the windows as people inside continued discussing what had just transpired. With a small, knowing smile, he typed his response. "We changed the narrative. I was just doing my job," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "No," Elon replied, shaking his head. "You went beyond that. You showed empathy when it would have been easier to look the other way." The diners looked at Sophia, their expressions ranging from guilt to admiration. The weight of their actions settled heavily on them as they realized how quickly they had judged without knowing the full story. Elon turned back to the room. "To those of you who judged me tonight, let this be a lesson. Appearances are deceiving. The way you treat others reveals who you truly are." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope, handing it to Sophia. "This is for you," he said. Sophia opened it carefully, her hands trembling. Inside was a handwritten note and a check. Her eyes widened as she read the note aloud. "Sophia, thank you for your kindness. Use this to follow your dreams, culinary school, your own restaurant, whatever you choose. The world needs more people like you." Her voice broke as she read the last words, tears streaming down her face. The check, written for $50,000, slipped from her hand and fluttered to the floor. The room erupted into murmurs of shock and awe. Elon turned to the manager. "And for this restaurant, consider this a reminder to create a culture of respect for everyone who walks through your doors." The manager, clearly flustered, nodded but said nothing. The weight of the moment had rendered him speechless. The restaurant was a mix of stunned silence and quiet apologies as Elon made his way to the exit. Before leaving, he turned back to Sophia and smiled warmly. "Never lose that spark of kindness. It's rare, and it's powerful." With that, he stepped outside, the door closing softly behind him, leaving a room full of people reevaluating their actions. For a long moment, the restaurant remained silent. Patrons who had whispered cruel comments moments earlier now shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their faces flushed with embarrassment. Some avoided making eye contact with each other, while others fidgeted with their silverware. Sophia stood in the middle of it all, still clutching the note, her emotions a whirlwind of gratitude, disbelief, and pride. The manager approached her hesitantly, his usually confident demeanor now awkward and subdued. "You handled yourself well tonight," he said, his voice quieter than usual. Sophia glanced up, her expression unreadable. "Thank you," she replied, her tone polite but distant. She knew the manager had been one of the first to doubt Elon's presence, and now the shift in his attitude felt too little, too late. Across the room, a family who had openly stared at Elon earlier leaned in to whisper amongst themselves. The father sighed heavily, his face betraying a mixture of guilt and regret. "We shouldn't have judged him like that," he admitted to his teenage son, who nodded silently. At another table, a woman dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, her voice breaking as she spoke to her partner. "What if we've treated other people the same way? People we didn't even notice?" Sophia quietly resumed her work, clearing dishes and resetting tables. But the weight of what had happened lingered. Every interaction she had with a customer that night felt charged with an unspoken apology, a shared understanding that they had all learned a lesson they hadn't anticipated. As the evening wound down, Sophia slipped into the kitchen for a moment to catch her breath. She unfolded the note Elon had written, reading it again carefully. Beneath his message of gratitude, he had added a final line. Kindness is the currency that never loses its value. Keep spending it. Her heart swelled as she tucked the note into her apron pocket. The words a reminder of what truly mattered. When the last table was cleared and the staff began cleaning up for the night, the atmosphere in the restaurant felt different, lighter, yet introspective. The usual chatter and laughter had been replaced by quiet reflection. The staff gathered briefly at the end of their shift, as they always did. The manager, uncharacteristically reserved, addressed the team. Tonight was unusual, he began, choosing his words carefully. And I think we all have something to think about after what happened. Let's make sure this place represents what we say we stand for. Sophia caught a few glances from her coworkers, some offering small smiles of respect. She didn't need their approval, but it felt good to know that her actions hadn't gone unnoticed. As she left the restaurant that night, the envelope tucked securely in her bag, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The money would change her life. Yes, but the lesson she had witnessed would change how she approached the world forever. Outside, the city buzzed with its usual energy. But to Sophia, everything felt sharper, more vivid. Elon Musk's experiment had left a mark on her, on the restaurant, and on everyone who had witnessed it. Days after the event, news of Elon Musk's Undercover experiment spread like wildfire. Social media platforms buzzed with discussions, the story reaching millions of people across the globe. Headlines ranged from Elon Musk tests humanity at upscale restaurant to billionaire rewards kindness in unforgettable experiment. The Copper Elm quickly became the center of attention, though not all of it was flattering. Stories of the staff and diners' initial reactions drew both criticism and introspection from readers. Comment sections filled with debates about empathy, societal judgment, and how appearances shape perceptions. People questioned their own biases, reflecting on whether they, too, would have judged someone unfairly based on their appearance. Sophia's life, meanwhile, transformed overnight. Reporters sought her out for interviews, eager to hear her perspective on the event. At first, she was hesitant, overwhelmed by the sudden spotlight. But when she finally spoke, her words were simple yet powerful. It wasn't about knowing who he was, she told one journalist. It was about treating someone with dignity, no matter their circumstances. That's something we should all do, not just for billionaires in disguise, but for everyone. The sincerity of her words struck a chord with people around the world. Many praised her for her kindness, calling her an inspiration. Others admitted that the story had forced them to rethink their own actions and prejudices. The $50,000 check allowed Sophia to enroll in culinary school, something she had only dreamed of before. But more importantly, the experience gave her a platform to advocate for kindness and inclusivity in the service industry and beyond. She used her newfound attention to highlight the importance of treating all customers, regardless of status, with the same level of respect and care. Meanwhile, Elon reflected on the experiment privately. In an interview months later, he spoke briefly about the experience. It reminded me that the smallest actions can reveal the biggest truths, he said. Kindness isn't just about grand gestures. It's about the everyday choices we make. He didn't elaborate further, choosing instead to let the story speak for itself. But those who had witnessed the event firsthand knew that his words carried weight. The Copper Elm also underwent changes. The management, shaken by the backlash, implemented new training programs emphasizing empathy and respect for all guests, regardless of appearance. Staff members, particularly those who had been dismissive that night, found themselves reevaluating their biases and behavior. For those who had been present in the restaurant that evening, the lesson stayed with them. Many returned to their daily lives with a new perspective, carrying the memory of that night as a reminder to treat others with compassion. Some customers even started leaving generous tips and kind notes for servers, paying forward the kindness they had witnessed. One evening, a man who had been dining at the Copper Elm the night of the experiment returned. He was one of the many who had whispered judgments about Elon's presence. As he sat at his table, he watched Sophia move gracefully between guests, her demeanor unchanged despite the attention she had received in the past weeks. When she came to take his order, he hesitated before speaking. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. Sophia blinked in surprise. Sir? That night, I was one of them, he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. I judged before I knew the full story. I made assumptions. And after everything that happened, I realized just how wrong I was. Sophia studied him for a moment, then offered a small smile. It's never too late to see things differently, she replied. He nodded, visibly relieved. I've been thinking about that night ever since. It made me wonder how many times I've done the same thing without realizing it. Sophia simply nodded, understanding more than words could express. She had seen how a single moment of kindness had rippled outward, changing not just her life, but the lives of so many others. Across the world, the story continued to inspire conversations about the way society treats people based on external perceptions. Schools used it as an example in ethics discussions. Businesses re-examined their customer service policies. Families shared it around dinner tables, teaching their children the importance of kindness. But for Sophia, the true impact was something more personal. One day, as she finished up a late-night shift, she found a small, familiar-looking envelope tucked between the pages of her order book. Inside was another note from Elon Musk. Sophia, I hope culinary school is treating you well. I wanted to remind you, kindness is a rare and powerful gift. Never stop using it. The world needs more people like you. Elon, tears welled in her eyes as she read the words. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the fame. It was about the simple, powerful truth that kindness had the ability to change lives. As she tucked the note safely into her pocket, she smiled. The story of Elon Musk's experiment teaches us a fundamental truth. Kindness is a choice we make every day. In a world where people are often judged by their appearance, wealth, or status, true character is revealed in how we treat others when we think no one is watching. A small act of kindness, like treating someone with respect or offering a helping hand, can create ripples that change lives. Let's strive to see beyond first impressions, to listen with empathy, and to act with compassion. Because in the end, success isn't measured by what we have, but by the impact we leave on others.